After sharing this story, I'll tell you even more about it. But first, let's get to the heart of what it's all about: fate. We often say, what's meant to happen will happen. This story is also a tale of fate's unexpected twists. It's set in a small town in Texas, where a young timber businessman named Henry England lived. Life was going well for Henry. His business was steady, and he was content in his own world. It was back in 1881 when he met a young woman named Macy. Over time, their friendship deepened and eventually blossomed into love. Their relationship was strong, and 2 years passed by. Macy felt Henry was the perfect man to marry. In 1883, she brought up the idea of marriage to Henry, who promised they'd tie the knot. But as time went on, their marriage plans kept getting delayed. Arguments started to brew between them, and eventually one day, Henry outright refused to marry her. This shattered Macy's heart. Heartbroken, she returned home and shared everything with her brother. Macy's brother, who was about her age, tried to console her, telling her that with time, things would get better. But Macy couldn't recover from the heartbreak and ultimately took her own life. Her death deeply shattered her brother. He knew Henry was the one responsible for her tragedy. Now he was determined to avenge his sister's death. With a fierce resolve, he set his mind on teaching Henry a lesson and began planning his revenge. As the story unfolds, you'll see the lengths Macy's brother goes to in his quest for revenge and how fate intervenes in surprising ways, making this tale both gripping and emotional. Through it, we come to understand how powerful human emotions, love, anger, and the drive for revenge can completely alter lives. Driven by the memory of his sister's tragic end, Macy's brother was ready to carry out his plan in the same deadly way. It was 1883, and fueled by rage, he bought a pistol, prepared to end Henry's life. He began closely watching Henry's every move, waiting for the perfect moment and place to strike. Henry had once expected Macy's brother to be part of his family, so he knew him well. However, after Macy's death, Henry kept his distance, though most people had no idea about the tragic love story or its grim outcome. Only a few close individuals were aware of the heartbreak and its consequences. Then came a day in June 1883 when Macy's brother made up his mind once and for all he would end Henry's life. With a firm resolve, he set out toward Henry's home. But when he arrived, Henry wasn't there. Near Henry's house was a wooded area where he often worked cutting timber. Macy's brother headed into the forest where he spotted Henry standing by a tree. Their eyes met from a short distance. In that tense moment, Macy's brother drew his pistol, aiming right at Henry's head. He squeezed the trigger, but just as he fired, Henry sensed something, a faint noise perhaps, and instinctively tilted his head ever so slightly. Fate intervened as the bullet grazed Henry's ear, embedding itself into the tree behind him. Blood started trickling from his ear, and overwhelmed by the pain, he collapsed to the ground, clutching his ear tightly to stop the bleeding. Meanwhile, Macy's brother saw Henry fall and assumed his shot had hit its mark. He believed Henry was dead and left the scene without checking to see if Henry was actually alive or not. Convinced he had completed his mission, Macy's brother didn't bother to confirm the bullet's impact or Henry's condition. Confident Henry wouldn't survive, he quickly left the area. Henry, however, managed to pull himself together and make his way to a doctor. After receiving some initial treatment, he returned home, shaken but alive. Back at his own home, Macy's brother felt a sense of peace, convinced he had finally avenged his sister's death. But soon, the weight of his actions and the reality of his crime dawned on him. While he hadn't considered himself a criminal, he began to realize he had broken the law and attempted to take a man's life. This awareness stirred a deep sense of guilt and confusion within him, and he grappled with whether his actions were justified. Eventually, the remorse and fear grew so overwhelming that he decided to end his own life. Within 24 hours, he shot himself in the same way he had tried to shoot Henry. Thus, both Macy and her brother met tragic ends, but Macy's brother died believing he had killed Henry, unaware of the real outcome. Time passed, and a few years later, Henry moved on and married. He had a son, and gradually, his life regained a sense of normalcy. 20 years went by, and the year was now 1903. Henry's son had grown up, and Henry's business was thriving. One day, Henry and his son went to that same forest to cut trees, the very place where he had been shot at 20 years earlier. By sheer coincidence, Henry found himself standing next to the very tree where the bullet had lodged 2 decades earlier. Workers were attempting to cut it down, but the tree was incredibly sturdy and wouldn't budge. It was strange fate that brought Henry back to this tree after so many years. Its roots had grown deep, and its wood had become so dense that cutting it down was proving nearly impossible. Observing their struggle, Henry instructed his manager and workers to use dynamite to bring down the tree. Once the dynamite was set, Henry, his son, and the workers moved 50 feet away. When the blast went off, the explosion dislodged the bullet buried deep within the tree for 20 years. Fate took yet another twist as the bullet shot out of the shattered wood with great force, hitting Henry squarely in the forehead. He had no time to react, and within moments, he was dead. It was the very same bullet that Macy's brother had fired to end Henry's life all those years ago. Back then, Henry survived, and the bullet lodged itself in the tree. But 20 years later, that very bullet completed its mission, claiming Henry's life. This tale became a symbol of fate and destiny's mysterious ways. The one marked by death ultimately met it, but 2 decades later, with the bullet meant for him. The incident was so strange and unbelievable that it made headlines in a 1905 evening newspaper, the Jackson Sentinel, with the title, "The Unearthly Case of Punishment." The article detailed how a bullet fired 2 decades earlier finally killed the man it was meant for. People were fascinated and mystified by the story, a true testament to the whims of fate. When this event happened in 1903, it sparked widespread discussions and became front-page news. Following the Jackson Sentinel, many newspapers across the U.S. also picked up the story, giving it prominent coverage. The story resurfaced again in 1913, once more capturing the public's attention and reigniting debates on destiny and coincidence. Many journalists and researchers tried to uncover the truth behind this story, but no concrete evidence or records could be found to confirm its occurrence. The names of Henry England and Macy's brother left no trace in historical records, and over time, this tale evolved into a legend. Yet, it continues to leave people wondering, can fate and destiny truly play such an elaborate game? While many dismissed it as fiction, some viewed it as an extraordinary twist of destiny. There's no doubt this story was published in newspapers across the U.S. and Canada for years, and even today, it occasionally resurfaces. Before wrapping up, it's important to note that stories like these, whether fact or fiction, spark our curiosity and push us to think. They make us reflect on the unpredictability of life and the strange paths it can take. If any more evidence or information about this tale ever emerges, it would be fascinating to dive deeper. Friends, if you enjoyed this crime story, please hit the like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. For more interesting crime stories, tap the bell icon so you'll be the first to get updates. Thank you.